Hi, everyone. This is Miss Fusaro. So, I am going to talk to you about the different features of heroes and the evolution of the heroes over time. So, taking a look back at the Odyssey, you guys got the information about Odysseus and what type of hero he was. And here in this chart, you have a list of what the qualities are for a Greek hero. And yes, this does apply for tragic hero, because as you can see, like death must occur in an unusual way. There's a suffering. A Greek hero is a tragic hero by nature because, as we know, with the Greeks, everybody, including their heroes, had flaws. Usually the fatal flaw, the hamartia, that's called the fatal flaw. It usually is hubris, which is, as you guys know, excessive pride. But and that ends up leading to their downfall eventually. You will have stories where you're not getting the full feature of the hero, but heroes have like these different quests. So, for example, you have Jason and the Argonauts, and the story that you just read about the quest for the Golden Fleece, and we don't see Jason's downfall in this particular story, but later on in different stories, you will find Jason's flaw. But the big thing here is you see that he has assistance from the divine. All of these characters, of royal birth, of demigod, performs these extraordinary feats. Noble character, which is close to ideal, but this fatal flaw. We see the flaw the way he behaves with Medea. The suffering of the character is physical. Fights now important other feature. Hero fights for his own honor. His deeds belong to the community only after his death. So like he achieves like the quest of the Golden Fleece, and later on, like in other stories, we find out about his death, but the fact that he obtained this Golden Fleece that belongs to the world, so to speak, even though the quality of that circumstance belongs to him. Now, there's a huge time gap before the definition of the hero begins to evolve, before it begins to shift, because the next evolution of the hero happens in medieval times. So we're looking at thousands of years where it's the same type of hero coming out of these stories until you get the medieval hero. And the big shift here is that and I'm being very conscientious about using the pronoun he can be of any birth and fights for the honor of the kingdom. So this is where we are supposed to start to take note that the construction of the heroes in these stories has to do with whomever is in power. So the medieval hero, what happens is that now in medieval times, there is a huge shift between the class system and the social hierarchy. Your rich are extremely rich and your poor are destitute. So your poor people have lost their faith in their kingdom. They think, why should I fight for a king who's literally sitting on his golden throne, with food and servants all in abundance, while my family is suffering, starving, dying, going through plague, and he wants me to fight for him and defend his crown and defend his throne? Why should I? So what happens is they start to evolve these stories of a young boy being born of just a poor farmer and his wife, and suddenly has great he practices his sword and he becomes a knight and he becomes honored, and the stories start to come about, like of any birth. And this instills both hope for all types of people, but it has the political agenda with it as well, because if you are telling these stories to children, they grow up believing that this is a possibility. This is a possibility. Well, then maybe I could do this too. And you start to reinstill this honor and this faith into the kingdom. And so you have the medieval hero who it serves both factors. It is positive. It's a positive message that anybody could be a hero, but it also has a political agenda. So you have to recognize it from the medieval perspective, the new historicism, and but simultaneously also being postmodernist and post-structuralist, being critical about the fact that really it was serving this political agenda. Fast forward, we now have a great deal more time in between until you get the romantic hero. Now, I want to clarify something on the image here. I do have a picture of Batman because Batman fits the characteristics, but the romantic hero came about in the 18th century. So this was far before Batman was created, but he just has those characteristics. So I want to be clear about that. Batman is not from the 18th century. He just fits these characteristics. But the romantic hero is brooding, dark, and dreaming. He's at odds with society. He's not interested in authority or conformity. He wallows, he indulges in his own feelings, his uniqueness, and he has a deep intuition, and he's self centered. So you see that this hero has dynamically shifted from our Greek hero and our medieval hero. I mean, rather, our tragic hero and our medieval hero, because this hero is focused on the self. And again, this is demonstrative of the time. So we got to look at it from this new historicism critical perspective. What's going on in the 18th century? People are starting to feel disgruntled towards their government. We start having advancements in science. There is starting to be a divide between the rulings of the church versus the rulings of science. People are starting to, things that they were accepting as of God, what they are now being disproven as, well, it's science as opposed to just God, or as opposed to some type of ritualistic factor. So people are kind of losing faith in, again, in the ruling class who's telling them what they're supposed to be. So they're feeling this disgruntled nature. They're feeling, because though those ruling classes were telling them how they should live in with regards to boxed rules and boxed society, there is no individual choice. And now you have your heroes who are disgruntled by that. And they're like, well, no, I'm going to serve for myself instead of being for society. I'm going to serve for, and usually when we say serve for myself, it's his own interests. And it's usually pertaining to some type of love and romance, and thus the romantic hero. One of the greatest examples is Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights. He has questionable tactics, but it's all done in the name of his great passionate love that transcends the grave. Fast forward again, there hasn't been a shift for quite a long time, but now there's been a huge divide between um, church and state. So that's no longer an issue. People of faith are the people of faith, and they're recognizing there's a separation. So that's not affecting our heroes anymore. However, what is affecting our heroes is the state itself and the state of government. So before we even get to the anti-hero and the vigilante, there was a state of, you see, I put a picture of Captain America, and this happens in the 20th century. Captain America himself was actually a functional piece of propaganda that was proposed by the American government. So it's important, again, from this new historicism perspective, to recognize after World War One, people, the American citizens, were war fatigued. It wasn't that much time in between World War One and World War Two. So the same people who were affected by World War One are now again being affected. It's their children and their grandchildren are being affected by World War Two. They are war fatigued. They don't want to become involved in the war, and thus we had the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and this was used as the movement to try to get people into the war. And Captain America is part of that. He's part of that. He creates this propaganda of what an ideal American citizen would be. And again, he's of normal birth, but he becomes enhanced to be this great Nazi fighter. He's perfect in every way. He's cookie cutter. He's clean cut, boy next door. And he fights these Nazis. Everything is ideal and perfect about him. And you also then come from them where you have like Superman and these absolutely perfect. They are flawless. And it's great as far as an image is concerned, but people see through this. People see through this because they're flawless. And it's hard to relate. It's hard to relate to these characters. So then Superman comes in, he has all of a sudden this physical flaw where like kryptonite, and all of a sudden that it's something that he can fall to. But nonetheless, it's not relatable enough. It's too superficial. People see right through it. Fast forward again. Now we're in the 90s. So the evolution of the hero, for so many years, nothing happens. But then the 20th century, we have dynamic evolutions very quickly. So just first to understand anti-hero and vigilante. Vigilante is a type of anti-hero. So anti-hero is the umbrella term. And this is where this hero is really kind of conspicuously lacking in heroic qualities. And what that I mean by that is there's a great sense of moral ambiguity to this hero, this protagonist. Specifically, a vigilante is one who decides to take the law in his or her, and I say her because that's now, even though the characters here are still male, you're seeing more her in current times, like 2020s, but otherwise before that, not really. his or her own hands. They take the law into their own hands and they say, well, the government is not doing what it's supposed to do, so I'm going to do what's right. And that's, again, where Batman fits. He tries to do what's best for Gotham City despite all his wars that go on back and forth with the government of the city. And if we take a look at the examples that I'm presenting before you, we'll see how they function as the anti-hero. And this is because people not necessarily have become more complex, but their desire for stories that are much more relatable to what a hero could be. So in the past, like, the fact that they were born of anyone was enough, but now that's not enough. So anyone could be a hero, but not everybody's perfect. In fact, no one is. And with that, how could I possibly be a hero if I'm not like Captain America? I'm not perfect. I'm not good all the time. Everyone is morally ambiguous sometimes. Everyone is self-serving sometimes. So that's where these characters lie. So starting at the very top, I have an image of the character Dexter. Dexter is a serial killer, and for all intents and purposes, this is not what we consider to be heroic qualities. But as the main protagonist of his own storyline, he draws a strict moral line where he will only kill other killers, and specifically other killers who don't have any moral line. So he feels he is actually cleansing the earth in a way because he's going after other serial killers. So in his mind, like, he's satisfying this, what views as like this unquenchable thirst to kill, but doing it with a moral code. So it almost makes him, I don't want to say relatable, because I mean, it's very hard to relate to a serial killer, but we can reasonably and pragmatically comprehend his logic. Right beneath him, I have an image of Professor Snape. Those of us who are Harry Potter fans, we know that Professor Snape served as, for most of the Harry Potter series, he was terrible to Harry. He was abusive, he was maligned, and we don't find out until the very end it's because he actually was trying to protect him, and that he had this bitterness towards Harry's father because he was really, truly, deeply in love with Harry's mother, and he actually did very much care about Harry in turn. But we don't see that for such a long time. So he appears to be this villain, and we find out he's really not. So we have this shift, and he serves as an anti-hero, that all of his actions were actually trying to protect Harry, even though Harry felt like it was different. Right next to him, I have the picture of Tony Soprano. Tony Soprano came out in the TV show The Sopranos, I believe it was the late 90s on HBO, and he's a mob boss. So the head of the mafia, again, they use very questionable tactics to achieve wealth and power, and which he does. But over the course of the series, he becomes softer and more compassionate and uses his status to actually try to do good things. And there are choices that he makes that we would never align with a mafia boss, that he does to try to protect the people that he cares about. And we start to see his shift in his character. So even toward at the end of the series, he's still, a mob boss, but he has good qualities. Batman, again, features this because he serves as a vigilante. He takes justice into his own hands for what he views as the betterment of Gotham City. To the right, I have a picture of Rick Grimes. Rick Grimes is from The Walking Dead. And so The Walking Dead, it opens up, Rick Grimes is a sheriff, pre-apocalypse. He toes the line. He's a good father. He's a good husband. He fits the bill of everything. But once the apocalypse hits, we see a dynamic shift of him over time, that he starts making decisions that only serve the people he loves and his crowd, his tribe, so to speak. In It hurts others. It hurts others, but we understand because we're aligned with his particular tribe, because they're the ones that we're following in this story. But we know that the choices that he makes are morally ambiguous and not always good, but he's doing it for the people he loves. So again, we can relate to him, but still functions as an anti-hero. And to the right, I have a picture of Walter White. Walter White is from Breaking Bad, the main protagonist there. In Breaking Bad, Walter White, the series opens up where he's a high school chemistry teacher, and he gets diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And terminal lung cancer, but as a chemistry teacher, he knows that he doesn't have enough money to support his family when in his impending death. So he ends up falling in with a drug crowd, and with his chemistry skills, he starts making methamphetamine, meth, and he actually ends up being very good at this and becomes a major drug boss. Over time, we see the de-evolution of his character. He becomes darker, making far more questionable choices and far more selfish choices, and he starts hurting a lot more people because you know what happens when you fall into a drug rig. It's never good. But at the root of it, it's still always him trying to protect his wife, his child, and eventually also him trying to protect his partner. So there are still great redeemable and anti-heroic qualities about him that make us still align with him even at the end of the series. So as you can see, at this point in time in the 90s, people have become quite disenfranchised with the government. They've now been through Vietnam War, Gulf War. These are two major wars where people did not align with the purpose behind these wars. So the governmental ideal of what a hero is supposed to be no longer fits the bill. It's about protecting the people you love, your best interests, and the whatever your sphere of influence possibly is, and thus the birth of the anti-hero. If you have any questions, please bring them up in class. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.